Good afternoon, everyone. My fire is burning on my side, and we're getting into the mood of our fireside chat today with our great guest, Dan Broten from the Equitable Bank. And I think some of you may know Dan, and some of you might be meeting him for the first time today. I'd like to go back to Dan and give him a little bit of an opportunity to reflect on his career where it comes to digital transformation. Dan, I know that you have been working in the banking industry, then went out and became an entrepreneur at startups, and then you went into consulting, and then you came back into the bank at a director level and grew up, and now with the phenomenal growth that you've done in digital transformation, you're in a position to be at the helm and running this over there. Seeing all of this journey, what is your definition of digital transformation? You've seen the whole spectrum. Can you share your thoughts with everyone about how do you see digital transformation?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Dariush, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm happy to meet the team, and I hope we have some good questions and dialogue today as we dive into this topic. So I think, as Dariush outlined, like some of my career pivots, like one of the most interesting ones for me, where I probably learned the most about digital, and I'll define it a bit more afterwards, is when I got fed up with the big banks and I just wanted to change, and I quit cold turkey and said, I'm diving into the startup world. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something. It's probably going to be wrong, but I'm willing to learn. And I think that agility, the empowerment, and just rolling up my sleeves and actually getting experience is really what benefited me most in my career and helped me to get to where I am now. With digital transformation, I think this is a very much abused phrase. There's kind of, people confuse it with maybe the smaller sense of digitization, where you're just automating your existing business processes with technology. There's some changes to the process and people, but the business model itself relatively stays the same. And I think in the grander sense of digital transformation, I think this is where it excites me and probably the rest of the group here a lot more, is when you're really changing your business model. And I think that's the opportunity to revisit, rethink, what are your channels, what are your products, what are your services you're trying to provide, and what's the best way to provide them. And often you'll kind of turn things 90 degrees or so to be able to figure out what that new picture looks like. But it's very different than just digitizing what you do today. And I think that's a really important area of going towards the destination. But the other part of this is, I don't think digital transformation or being digital is an endpoint. It's a journey, and it's about learning, it's about getting experience, and it's about reacting quickly so that you can remain competitive and offer out new experiences to the ever-changing market that you're trying to service.
Excellent point. So you do see it as transforming the business model more than transforming the technology, and that's what the learning I'm having from you today. So we know that in changing the business model and transforming the bank to the bank that you are today at Equitable Bank and EQ Bank, Forbes has ranked Equitable Bank as the #1 bank in Canada this year, and that must have been a very important honor for everybody at the bank that has worked on this achievement. But what I want you to share with us is, what was the secret sauce of transforming the bank into #1 ranked bank in Canada?
Well, I think that Forbes was quite an honor. There's a lot of different rankings out there, but what we really appreciated about the Forbes one was it was from customers. And I think there's a lot of other rankings out there that are not necessarily as fair or level playing field. Mm-hmm. And being a smaller bank, this was a great story for us to hear, because it really embraces everything we've been trying to challenge around the industry and the ecosystem, and just change our customers' expectation on what banking should be, and also what it shouldn't be. Because there's a lot of friction in the system that doesn't need to be there, and we think there's a better way to do it. So I'd say part of our big secret sauce is part of that mindset, that culture. We don't want to maintain the status quo. We want to try and solve things differently. And often it does mean looking at the problems differently, like redefining what the problems are in a lot of contexts, and really what we might want to start to pursue is a solution that others may not have tried before. And we're not afraid to fail. We're willing to take a bit of risks. We're willing to fail small and learn fast, but you really have to learn. And I think this idea of being able to build something, measure it, learn from it, and quickly iterate is really the secret sauce that we have as a company. We're not afraid to learn from what we put out there. We're not afraid to put out something that's an embarrassing MVP. Frankly, if it's not embarrassing, you probably spent too much time developing it. So you have to have a bit of a risk appetite for how you're going to interact with your customers in the market, so that you're willing to learn just from what you're putting out there. And I think that just hearing what your customers want and being able to react to that in a very, very quick pace is really our big differentiator, and what's helped us be successful with our customers.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that secret sauce with us. Going back to the culture and people. Most banks recycle resources between the towers downtown, close to our office. We can see people moving from this building to the other building, changing jobs on LinkedIn. They were in this bank, they're now in this bank. And the culture doesn't change as much because they're all pretty much almost the same. But when you go into a challenger bank or a smaller organization that has that agility, you can attract different quality of skills and people. I want to go back on that and ask you about your experience in attracting talent and bringing people in who have had that risk tolerance of trying and failing and helping you in this digital transformation. How was it different at Equitable Bank compared to your previous experience in the big banks?
I'd say refreshing is probably the number one word that I'd start with. And people like myself and others that we've brought onto the team, we've been really frustrated with the bureaucracy and the red tape and just how much talk there is about doing things, but a lack of action. And I think in most technologists' core, people really want to accomplish things. I know what motivates me is being able to make change and see the results of what we're launching or what we've been talking about for a month and see something come out of it. Just seeing that progress and the impact that it's having to enrich people's lives or make a different experience for customers. To me, pushing towards that outcome is everything. And I think people get really frustrated in those bigger companies and some of the moats and friction that get put around internally and externally, and they feel handcuffed. And certainly that's a lot of what happened to me in my career earlier on. I felt I couldn't make the change that was necessary, that we all wanted to do. Everyone wants to do the right thing, but there are all these barriers. And when it comes to what's different about us than a smaller company is those barriers are removed. I mean, we're able to make decisions quickly. We're able to empower our teams. As a company, we're very supportive of taking risks and failing. And I think what you'd see at some of the bigger companies is failures viewed very much as a detractor, and you may have that blemish on for the rest of your career if you're not careful with the certain risks you take. Whereas we try to frame that as more of the positive and really put that into the culture about sharing your learnings and sharing your failures. And it's not a wall of shame type of moment. It's I've learned something type of moment, really to focus on how you're getting better and how you're increasing the maturity of the company through those learnings. So I think that's a big part of it. And when it comes to hiring, it's been interesting because we're somewhere between a fintech and a big bank. And often not a lot of people are looking for something in between, but once they discover it, they say, oh, that's interesting. It's got the security and the stability and the opportunities that a big bank would have, but a lot of the benefits that a fintech or startup have, because we've got that agility, we've got that modern tech stack, we've got this different type of culture that lets us get things done and really focus on the outcomes.
Yeah, excellent. Obviously, having the right people and motivating the right people to take the risk and doing the job is an important factor in the company's culture, and you've certainly proven that model. Now, in order to do big transformation and achieve fast results often we may not have enough people inside the organization, and we may not be able to recruit the right resources at the right time. It's a competitive market out there, and sometimes partnering with companies that are good in certain things will accelerate the journey. Can you share with us the impact of partnerships between what Equitable Bank had with the ecosystem in the fintech, in financial services and technology providers, in consultants, and wherever that contributed to your success? If you can discuss that and open that for us a little bit.
Yeah, there's that common phrase of, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together or with your partners. And I think that's really what the same point, kind of tying back to this digital journey. There's no end point. It is a long game, and we know we're in for the long game. We can't do everything or be everything to our customers. And part of being a smaller company or being a fintech is you have to be selective on which areas you're going to invest in. And so a lot of that comes down to partnership, where we may not have the right capabilities, skills, or frankly, diversity of thinking and experience. And we want to bring in specialized groups, partners that can really elevate our game and challenge us in different ways that we may not have thought of. Even being this challenger bank, sometimes we get complacent and also need to disrupt ourselves a bit. So we're very open to outside thinking and trying to be a bit more innovative and be challenged in different ways. Yeah. But I think a lot of it comes down to, in a partnership sense, there's different pockets of expertise, and we're very, very much and very open to tap into those expertise. We don't want to be everything to everyone. We don't want to try and reinvent the wheel. We don't want to try and build every single product ourselves. We know there's good cases where we really want to innovate and control the experience for our customers or the product or service. But when we get into these broader ecosystem, we see banking evolve more in Canada, I think we're going to see a lot more opportunities for partnership. And we're very open to that beyond just kind of our core partners like Blanc Labs that help us day to day. I think there's a newer paradigm coming with the ecosystem in Canada that's starting to build around financial services.
Yeah, indeed. And from my experience coming from outside as a consultant, as someone who helps facilitate innovation for enterprise clients, such as financial institutions, I have sensed that a bit of a cultural difference between a fast and entrepreneurial company that is from outside going into organizations that haven't evolved and haven't transformed. And it was interesting because we have seen the entire journey of how you folks at Equitable in the past 6 years. I've had the honor to work with you folks. Even before Dan joined, I had seen the impact of what Dan did after he joined. And I'd like to go back to Arash, who has also worked in consulting firms, big, and now is working with you closely from outside. Arash, what do you think was the impact of the experience that you took in with a perspective of agile and collaboration and added value to the journey that Equitable's team was going, specifically on the technology side? And how did you complement and blend in? Tell us a little bit about that experience.
So at a higher level, that's an interesting question, because as a challenger bank, I think, as Dan also mentioned, the culture of how people see their organization is different in terms of trying to innovate and revisit and revamp their business model. And I think that really fits very nicely within a proper digital transformation journey. And I think in that sense, I think that the talent aspect and the partnership aspect of blending together and working as one team is really the way that we have worked together over these years with the Equitable team. And it's truly one team. Like even physically before COVID, I used to actually be present at the bank Monday to Thursday, for example. And even since then, like we are really many times we think that we're one and there's no difference, minus maybe our email addresses. I don't see any difference in terms of this is the Blanc Labs team versus the Equitable team. Like it's really operating as one team, and that spirit of collaboration and partnership really accelerates the work and help us to go over some of the usual roadblocks that we have seen, or in my experience working with much larger organizations and maybe the larger top big five banks, for example. That whole culture of hierarchy and the politics and whatever, a lot of that is really reduced or removed, which really accelerates the work and the impact that we get from that, for sure.
Great. And both of you are talking about challenger bank. And Dan, what is a challenger bank? What is your definition of a challenger bank? We hear challenger bank here and there, people that want to be a challenger bank, people who, I should say people, what I mean in the industry, banks who want to become a challenger bank, bigger financial institutions who want to spin off a challenger bank and neobank. Can you talk a little bit about what is that identity and how does it look like to be a leading identity of this sort in the industry?
I think for us, it's not just about being a digital branchless bank. I think that's kind of the table stakes that come with this category. I think when we look at ourselves and where we want to go, it's actually about challenging banking today. We're not satisfied inside and out of the company with just how banking works for Canadians. We're lagging behind globally. We have a lot of friction in the system, as I mentioned. We're not open enough with our data. And it's a very closed ecosystem that just has a lot of moats that don't need to exist. And so even beyond just digital solutions, we really want to contribute to changing banking in Canada. And I think because we are a bank, we've got a way to do that for our customers, but we're also looking to try and make a mark in the industry with the government, with the regulations, to really improve the situation and help advance some of these forward-looking strategies, because a stronger banking system for all Canadians is really going to enrich everyone's lives and help the whole ecosystem develop, as I talked about. And I think open banking and real-time payments are a couple of areas that I think are the more obvious ones from a technology sense, but there are a ton of policies and procedures within banking that we've got some strong voices on behind the scenes from what a consumer would see. We're really trying to fight for the consumer and fight for what we think makes sense in terms of changing and improving the world for everyone in Canada.
Excellent. And when we talk about consumer-directed finance in Canada and the movement that the government of Canada has been supportive of, the open banking movement in Canada, as many of you know, is now labeled as consumer-driven finance or consumer-controlled finance. And what I want to open up a little bit more on is this point that you just mentioned. You want to be the voice of the customer and give the consumers choices with open banking. Can you talk a little bit about your proactiveness in this movement in Canada and what you're doing and how do you view this and how do you compare it to banking as a service?
I think it's a stepping stone to banking as a service, technology-wise and strategy-wise for us. When I think about what we're doing with open banking, like a lot of this right now is helping and advising and consulting where we can with the government and different advisory groups to try and help make this a reality sooner. I think the advisory committee recommended that January 2023 was the date that the government should be aiming for, and there's a series of steps to get there. And there's been some question, like, is that too fast? Is the industry going to be ready? And I think from our standpoint, it's absolutely not too fast. I mean, we've been knowing that this is something coming for a while, but we've got the benefit of having rebuilt our architecture a few times now over a few years to try and be more API centric, more microservice centric, and really take advantage of a lot of the cloud native capabilities that are available today and have been for the last 10 years. And so I think we're in a much better position based on our foundation to be able to tackle these challenges. So it's a lot easier for us and we feel more confident in doing it. But it's also part of our overall, I'd say, strategy or culture again, that we don't want to be everything to everyone. We know we can't be as a smaller player, but that doesn't mean we don't want to participate in the ecosystem or allow the opportunity for others to build on top of what we have. And I think that's where it's interesting for me about open banking is you've got this set of APIs and data that are securely consenting usage of data or access to transactions. If you take that a step further, it's not that much of a leap to think about as a service offerings being built on top of those APIs. And really now you're, from a bank perspective, a lot of your core offering is the API and the data and the business logic behind that. And I think it's really interesting for me to think about what types of more niche use cases or fintechs are going to be able to develop on top of such a platform in the future. And we're absolutely supportive of it because I think we've got everything to gain as from a consumer enablement standpoint and just changing finance in Canada. And I think banks have a big role to play in enabling that foundation.
Yeah, that ecosystem play that you alluded to is very important in the adoption of open banking in any country, and the countries who have had implemented that, the banks have worked together and with the government and regulators in order to make it happen. And sometimes the motivation came from the government putting pressure on the banks. Sometimes the motivation comes from the industry. Sometimes the motivation is the consumer putting pressure on should we do it. And in Canada, we do see some movements and resistances here and there, but eventually this is going to come together. And how do you see the innovation in the ecosystem? What should a fintech company think about right now, hearing you here, or what another banker that wants to work in this ecosystem should hear from you, that how can they accelerate this movement and working together and gel and enable the interoperability so that the consumer can win?
I think it's a tough question. I don't think there's one answer, but I'd probably go back to something I said earlier about rolling up your sleeves and getting experience in something. I mean, we've got a lot to learn from the international markets about how things have evolved and how the regulations have played in with the consumer or the different forums backed by various financial institutions. And so I think there's some learnings that we can get there. But ultimately, it's going to be a case of if you build it, they will come. And I think we're kind of at that cusp right now with a lot of companies and fintechs and even some banks where they're just starting to move in the direction they think is probably 80 to 90% accurate of where the market may go. And that's going to help us start to build that ecosystem. And for an ecosystem to work, you need a lot of people to provide and you need a lot of people to consume. And I think starting to get some momentum around that from a fintech perspective or a consumer's perspective is going to be critical, because without that type of usage, the ecosystem will not be. It'll just be a bunch of regulated data providers and not much happening. And that's why I think it's a tricky answer, Dariush, because it's not one thing that I think a fintech or banker could start to work on. Definitely, there is a lot of lobbying still to do and standards to be created, especially around digital ID. I mean, that's going to be the crux of a lot of this. And so I think there's still some pretty interesting opportunities around maybe finding these future use cases around what people will do once those standards are put in place. And it could be some things around digital ID or data exchange type of solutions, or even just niche banking experiences. So I'm not really sure what I would kind of tell to the world and say what they should do. I think this is the interesting question to kind of reverse is, if you have this technology, what would the world do with it? And then kind of see what the overall market would respond with.
Yeah, it's an excellent twisting of the question. Well, if you had a technology, what would the world do with it? It's funny because when you are a technology provider from outside, go talk to the big banks, they would ask, how many are you guys in your company? Who's the owner of the technology in the back? How can we sue you if you do not deliver? That's the mindset. And that's not the mindset of what I'm hearing from you, to take a risk and work with someone who's an innovator to actually put these things together. It's a very different mindset. And that's what we need to innovate in an ecosystem. Right? But You mentioned something very important in your response, and that was digital identity. And digital identity is I think it's a very important enabling factor inside this ecosystem that can unite the information going from various parties. And Canada has been a pioneer in digital identity. I mean, the Canadian government and Canadian banks have adopted the secure key and verified me for some years. And it seems to be now the enabling foundation for this digital ecosystem. And what are your thoughts on digital identity, and how will it enable your bank and people who want to come to this ecosystem to innovate?
I'd say there's even though there has been quite a lot of progress on digital identity, I still don't think it's nearly where it needs to be with tying together, I'd say, more of your digital persona across various institutions. It's very siloed still today in terms of its usage. And I think a lot of people a lot of companies still protect that data and what they do with it. And I don't think it's being federated enough to where it needs to be. And that's probably the next, I'd say, leap that needs to happen on digital identity before it's going to be more broadly used across institutions for different purposes other than just authentication. And I think that's where the whole scope and consent and authorization of what we're doing with that data is going to start to evolve. And so that's the exciting part to me. I think there does need to be regulation, though, in this space. There needs to be a standard that others are going to follow, and it needs to be a bit more prescriptive, because until we can get to that point, it's going to be tough to assume what those specs and usages are going to be. I think this goes beyond banking, which is part of the exciting part. Like, banks have a lot of data and a lot of security, a lot of customers, so they're a great area of starting in this problem. But as you mentioned, the government of Canada has a lot of use cases too. And I think all of us as not only banking customers, but citizens of this country, we all see the fragmentation across services, be it provincial or federal. And there's a huge opportunity to try and bring together beyond consumer-led finance, but just consumer-led data for all of the different things that we interact with across the country.
Yeah, and that word consumer is I think the biggest currency here, because everybody in the traditional banking sense wanted to own that customer and the entire share of the wallet of the customer and keep them as their customer for all banking needs. Versus in this model, we're looking at giving the consumer the option to choose who they're going to be banking with and for what. And in this fully federated system, I think the challenge now will become, once these services become open, once the APIs are open, people who have access to consumers want to do banking. Like, you'll see in this ecosystem, people that are not banks, but they have, a big marketplace like Amazon, or like a big, user base like the social networks. They may want to get in, and they are getting into banking. So how do you see that threat and ecosystem evolving in the next 5 to 10 years? How do you see this opening in Canada, obviously with all the red tape and regulations that need to be in place in order to do this? But I want to see your vision on this. What's the next 5 to 10 years look like?
Well, I think it's exciting. I mean, I wouldn't use the word threat. I actually use the word opportunity. I think it's for us as a company, we don't have the same business lines that have that moat around it that we're worried about cannibalizing. So we're very much open to creating these banking platforms in the background that can service fintechs or big techs or other partners in that ecosystem that need those types of services. And I think, frankly, what we've seen is there's so many silos around these services, like payments, point of sale payments, different rails that you can use within devices, have high fees and a lot of markup across that penalize businesses and customers alike. And I think as we start to open up this more competitive environment where things become running on platforms and you have that those barriers removed, those moats removed, it's going to become more competitive and ultimately benefit the consumers and businesses a lot more. And so I'm actually very excited about that, because I think this is going to be whole new business models that start to be created for financial institutions like us, but also the companies that are, and small businesses and startups that are kind of using these services or creating new products on top of them.
Yeah, it goes back to your first point that you said, it's changing the business model. And if you change your business model from traditional, that's transformation. And this is why you get excited about these and you don't see it as a threat. But those guys who are holding on to their old business models, no transformation on there, that probably would be a threatening future to see for them. And they may not react, they may overreact, and they may actually stop. No, we're not playing. But in internal, let's look at inside the bank. This is outside of the bank, outside, ecosystem. Let's look at inside the bank. In the past, everybody had their own technology teams building for the bank, big banks. Smaller banks did not have that opportunity, and they have to use outside resources. And now the cost of resources after COVID, finding resources, very competitive. And do you see banks still building things inside, or using new technology methodologies to build, such as low code, no code, and automation, and partnering with people can accelerate them with this? How do you see this space?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting challenge. I think we're evolving as well as technologists, and certainly inside the bank, I think building and having a good engineering discipline is always going to exist. You need to be able to control and manage things yourselves to be able to innovate and differentiate. And I think having a good engineering capability is necessary to do that in this marketplace. If everyone has the same off-the-shelf system, everyone's the same. We're not going to get that differentiation. When it comes to some of the changing skill sets and ways of delivering, I'm very optimistic about low code and how that works within the cloud ecosystems. I mean, we're on Azure, so we're a bit biased towards the Azure tool set, but I'm pretty interested in seeing just how these different components of the cloud come together when you see these low code automation. And automation can be many things, from machine learning through to RPA, through to smaller applications that can be built in a WYSIWYG style. But that whole ecosystem of a platform of applications can run on your cloud data sets really well behind the scenes in a very integrated fashion. And so not only does it make it far easier for kind of the engineers to use these low code platforms to build solutions very, very quickly, it starts to open up a bit more of the kind of business users or citizen developers to build small automations and really distribute some of the, I'll say, the less critical workflows or problems back into the hands of your end users and let them solve things directly. And we're starting to see some of that with some of the Office 365 and Power Platform across our organization. And certainly it's something that I want to dial up a lot, because I think there's a ton of value there in solving the small problems that sometimes don't make it off the backlog list onto the current sprint.
Yeah. Excellent. You touched on, your appetite to use things on the cloud, and I want to wrap up our conversation around that and ask you to please share with us your journey on going from on-prem to cloud, because Equitable Bank, EQ Bank, was, I think, the first bank that went on the cloud 100%. You're one of the first pioneers of making this migration to the cloud. For a lot of banks that I work with still, they do not have that comfort from a security, from a regulatory needs to take this journey. And what can you share with us that can give others who are listening right now some perspective as to, if they want to go through this journey, what are the challenges, what are the hurdles, and what are the good, silver lining on the other side? And what was your journey? If you can please open up that for us.
Yeah, I think we always knew that we were going to move to the cloud. We didn't know how quickly. And because of our growth, is actually our business scalability that was the #1 catalyst. and we couldn't keep up with the volume and growth that we had. So we knew we needed to accelerate that journey to cloud. And when we thought about cloud, it wasn't just about a lift and shift. That's the complete wrong way to do it. It was about re-engineering to try and be much more cloud native. I'd say our second evolution with where we moved in just over 2 years ago, it was mostly cloud native, not fully. So we got a lot of the benefits we were hoping from, but we knew we weren't at end of job. And it's that journey kind of conversation again. So we've still been working at it pretty hard for the last 2 years, and we're getting far more advanced in our microservices and how cloud native we are on the stack. So we're really getting a lot better scalability on this. But to be successful on this, you really need the understanding, the commitment from your board down through all the rest of the executive team. And I think we're very fortunate that our executive team was fully on board with kind of the business goal, but we also made it very clear that we thought the security was going to be far better on the cloud. And I mean, when you're standing on the shoulders of giants like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, like they spend more on cybersecurity than than many of us can fathom what number that is. I think Microsoft spends over $1 billion a year alone just on cybersecurity, which is a crazy amount of R&D. And by being on their cloud platforms, you get that benefit, and you're really standing on the shoulder of giants. And as a smaller bank, that's even more critical because we don't have a 300-person cybersecurity team. Like we need to be smarter about how we do things. We need to take advantage of the automation that cloud and modern technologies provide so that we can still maintain the right bar and levels. And I think what we saw is like our cybersecurity posture has definitely accelerated and gotten far better on cloud with the level of automation and tools that are available. So we're incredibly thrilled that we've got the scalability, the elasticity, the speed and ability from our DevOps team to be able to move quickly and release almost every day. We have a release to production, which is fantastic for a bank our size. I'm really proud of that. And it's all secure and stable and a repeatable process. So I think it's just a phenomenal benefit that we've got on cloud, and we're moving the rest of the bank to cloud. So I mean, hopefully in a few more years, we'll be 100% as an entire company on cloud.
Yes, amazing, and congratulations, Dan, for all the great achievements that Equitable Bank Group, Equitable Bank, EQ Bank together, being ranked as the #1 bank in Canada by Forbes, as well as achieving all of these challenging and difficult transformation digitally. And thank you again for sharing your insights with us.